Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're heading to Louisville, Kentucky, to a place that's, well, a little creepy even when it's sunny outside.
Oh, you mean Waverly Hills Sanatorium?
You got it. We're going to really dig into the history of this place, what happened there, and why it's so, well, infamous. If you're into history or healthcare or even the paranormal, this one's for you.
Yeah, Waverly Hills is really fascinating. You've got the history of the sanatorium itself and then all these stories about it being haunted.
Don't forget to subscribe to Untold Chronicles on YouTube if you want more deep dives like this one. But for now, let's get started. So, to understand Waverly Hills, we got to go back in time, way back.
Back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when tuberculosis was ravaging the country, they called it the White Plague.
Yeah, TB.
Yeah.
It was a terrifying disease. And Louisville, with its humid climate, was hit especially hard.
The Ohio Valley was like a breeding ground for TB. That's why a place like Waverly Hills was so desperately needed.
So they built this massive sanatorium. People must have had so much hope pinned on it.
They did. Back then, fresh air and sunlight were thought to be the best treatment for TB. And Waverly Hills, up on that hilltop, seemed like the perfect place for healing.
But the reality of TB treatment back then was pretty grim, wasn't it?
It was. Before antibiotics, there wasn't much they could do. Bed rest was the main treatment. But they also did these awful surgeries.
Surgeries. Like what?
Well, one was called thoracoplasty. They would actually remove ribs to try and collapse the infected lung.
Ouch. That sounds incredibly painful.
It was, and there was another procedure called pneumothorax where they injected air into the chest cavity to collapse the lung.
It's hard to imagine the suffering those patients went through.
And the staff, too. They were constantly surrounded by death. It must have been emotionally draining.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. A place meant for healing, but so closely tied to death.
And speaking of death, that brings us to one of the most unsettling aspects of Waverly Hills, the body chute.
Ah, yes, the infamous death tunnel. Tell me more about that.
It was originally built to transport supplies up to the sanatorium. But as the death toll from TB rose, they started using it to discreetly remove the bodies.
So they were basically hiding the bodies from the other patients.
Yeah, they thought it would shield them from the constant reminder of death. But I don't know if it really helped. It probably just added to the creepy atmosphere.
It definitely fed into the ghost stories that surround Waverly Hills today. But before we get into those, let's talk about what happened after TB became treatable.
Right. In 1943, streptomycin, the first effective antibiotic for TB, was discovered. It was a game changer.
So did Waverly Hills just shut down then?
Not right away. In 1962, it reopened as Woodhaven Geriatric Center, a facility for the elderly.
A new purpose, a new chapter. But I've heard things didn't go so well at Woodhaven.
No, they didn't. It quickly became overcrowded and understaffed, and there were reports of neglect and abuse.
Oh no. So it wasn't just ghost stories anymore. This was real suffering happening again.
Sadly, yes. Things got so bad that the state had to shut down Woodhaven in 1982. And that's when Waverly Hills was truly abandoned, left to decay and become a magnet for, well, all sorts of stories.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive, the story of Waverly Hills after it was abandoned. Stick around, it gets even more interesting.
Waverly Hills just sat there, empty. It's like all those years, all those stories just kind of sunk into the walls.
Yeah, you can almost feel it, right? The weight of all that history.
Exactly. And that emptiness, that decay, well, it just made those ghost stories even louder. People started going there, curious.
Urban explorers, ghost hunters, all drawn to the mystery.
Right. And they came back with stories, some pretty freaky ones too, like Room 502.
Room 502, that's the one where those nurses supposedly.
Yeah, there are all sorts of rumors about what happened in that room, but even without the stories, people say it just feels wrong, heavy.
There's something watching you.
Yeah, something like that. And then there's the story of the creeper, the shadowy figure that people see crawling on the walls.
Creepy. Do we know anything about it?
Nobody really knows what it is or why it's there, just that it's seen a lot, especially in the older parts of the building.
And then you've got Timmy, the little boy.
Timmy. He's kind of become the mascot of Waverly Hills, hasn't he?
It's always sad to hear about ghost children, especially one that just wants to play ball.
Some investigators even bring toys with them, hoping to get some kind of interaction.
It's weird, right? These stories, they're hard to prove, but they just add another layer to the whole place.
It makes you wonder, what's real and what's not.
And all the while, there's that death tunnel, that body chute, just sitting there,
Yeah.
a reminder of everything that happened.
Yeah, it's almost like they tried to hide death, but it just made it more present, more tangible. People hear things down there, voices, footsteps.
And it's not just the tunnel. The whole building is supposed to be active. Disembodied voices, shadows, cold spots.
You know, it's like a place that was meant for healing, for life, somehow became this symbol of death and the unknown.
It's almost poetic, but also super creepy.
Yeah.
So what happened to Waverly Hills? Did it just stay abandoned forever?
Actually, no. In the early 2000s, a group of people bought it.
Really? What for? Surely not to live there.
Well, they had this idea to restore it, but not just the building itself. They wanted to restore its story too.
You mean acknowledge the history, the good and the bad?
Exactly. And they wanted to be upfront about the ghost stories too, not exploit them, but present them alongside the facts.
So they started doing tours.
Yeah, they have historical tours where you learn all about the sanatorium, the treatments, the people who lived and worked there.
Trying to paint a full picture, not just focus on the spooky stuff.
Right, but they also have paranormal tours, ghost hunts, even haunted attractions during Halloween.
That's interesting. Almost like they're embracing both sides of Waverly Hills.
It's definitely a unique approach. Some people criticize it, but I think it's a way to keep the place alive, in a sense.
And generate some funds to actually restore the building, which I'm sure isn't cheap.
Exactly. It's a balance, you know. Respecting the history, but also acknowledging what Waverly Hills has become in the public imagination.
It makes you think about how we deal with the past, right? The things we choose to remember, the things we try to forget.
And maybe sometimes those things refuse to be forgotten. They linger, they whisper, they make us question what we think we know.
And that's where we'll leave it for now. We'll be back in a bit to wrap up our deep dive into Waverly Hills. You know, it's funny, we've been talking about Waverly Hills for a while now, and I still can't decide what's more fascinating, the real history, the facts, or the ghost stories.
It's like they're all tangled up together, isn't it? You can't really separate one from the other.
And that's reflected in how they run the place now, too. You've got those historical tours, super informative.
Yeah.
Then you've got the ghost hunts, the spooky stuff.
Yeah, it's a strange mix. You'd think those two things would clash, but somehow they work together.
I think the history actually makes the ghost stories more interesting. Like, you need to know what happened there to really understand why people feel so strongly about the paranormal activity.
Absolutely. Without that context, it's just spooky stories. But knowing the history, knowing the suffering that took place, it gives those stories a whole other dimension.
And practically speaking, both sides help preserve Waverly Hills. People go there for the history, they go there for the ghosts, and all that money goes towards keeping the building from falling apart.
It's kind of like the tangible and the intangible are working together to keep this place alive.
That's a good way to put it. It's a unique situation for sure.
It really makes you think, why are we so drawn to places like this? Is it the sadness, the mystery, the possibility that there's something more out there?
I think it's all of that.
Mm-hmm.
We want to understand the past, even the dark parts,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe, just maybe, we hope to get a glimpse of something beyond our understanding.
Maybe death isn't the end, you know? Maybe places like Waverly Hills are where the veil is thin and we can get a peek behind the curtain.
It's a sobering thought, but also kind of exciting, like anything is possible.
Exactly. It's about keeping an open mind, questioning what we think we know, and embracing the mysteries that still surround us.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Waverly Hills. But the exploration doesn't have to end here.
There's tons of information out there if you want to learn more. Books, documentaries, websites, you name it.
So keep digging, keep questioning. And hey, if you want more deep dives like this one, be sure to subscribe to Untold Chronicles on YouTube. We'll see you next time.